Welcome to a discussion with Tim Villegas, who will share his thoughts on the topic of resilience and hope now and into the future. We are thrilled to have you all here, and we are sure that this session will be not only informative, but also energizing for all of you as you continue your work and your journey as a family member of an individual with unique differences, as an educator, as a service provider, maybe all of these. PEAC welcomes you all here. But first, I'd like to tell you a little bit about PEAC, Pennsylvania's Education for All Coalition. PEAC is focused on collaboration towards successful inclusive experiences. And those experiences are experiences that involve the families, self-advocates. We work specifically to empower and engage self-advocates, for universities, our university partners, for students in schools and educators, as well as within the community. We do this in several ways. We have individualized support, training, and technical assistance that we provide to families, to educators, to universities, to self-advocates. So we are there basically to help you do your work and to help you move to the next step. And this is our mission. Our mission is not only for one child, but for all children, because we want to make systemic change. We promote inclusive environments through collaboration for people with disabilities, schools, universities, colleges, and all stakeholders, so that all students can be provided the opportunity for being involved with their neurotypical peers. So these are going to be the two areas that we're going to be focused on in our norms today, as I had mentioned. You're being recorded, except for the Q&A, and also we ask that everyone stay muted. Also, feel free to use the chat. We want that to be fully functional. You can put your questions in the chat, and we can address them at the Q&A session. And feel free to show your emojis. They have an option to show reactions. Let Tim know how you feel. Give those thumbs up when you want to. It's fine. The learning objectives for today, so you know what you're going to be sitting through, and you'll hear this again later. You will be inspired to keep advocating for the successful inclusive education. You're going to be familiar with how to talk about what we really want with inclusive education, and you're going to leave with a plan for next steps, which is very critical on how to move forward. Today, this session is going to be facilitated by Nithya Narayan, and she is on the call, as well as myself. And that means if you have any issues, any tech issues, you can message us separately in the chat, and we will address that during the session. I also don't want to assume that everyone is a Zoom expert. So if there's anything that you feel uncomfortable with or that you need assistance with, feel free to put that in the chat and direct that to Nithya and I as well. We are more than happy to help you. If you have any other issues, anything more detailed that you have burning and really want to say now or even after, this is the email address for PEAC. You can always reach any of the PEAC members there, as well as both of us. And now I'm going to turn this over to Nithya.
Tim Villegas is Director of Communications at Maryland Coalition for Inclusive Education, a nonprofit that envisions a society where neighborhood schools welcome all learners and create the foundation for inclusive communities. He is the founder of Think Inclusive and the host of Think Inclusive podcast. Throughout his 16-year career as a special education teacher, Tim advocated for inclusion of students with significant disabilities in general education classrooms and continues his work with Maryland Coalition for Inclusive Education to empower inclusive systems change in schools and districts. So the floor is all yours, Tim. We welcome you.
Thanks, Nithya. Thanks, Linda. I really am excited to be here and to share some time with you this morning. Did you go ahead and make me host again so I can share my screen? Let's see if this works.
You should be able to share it.
All right.
Yes, we can see
Did
your
you see
slide.
it?
Yes.
All right. That's the first win for today. Let's just put it that way. So good morning, everyone. Thanks to Nithya for asking me to be here. She contacted me a while ago at the beginning of this year to plan for this, and I'm really excited to speak with you about resilience and hope. So the first thing I want everyone to do is to take a deep breath, because I know I need that. You might need that. So we're going to go ahead and do that together. Ready? Because I want to know how everyone's feeling. I mean, really, there's a reason why you are here today. And go ahead and tell me in the chat, how are you feeling? Are you feeling hopeful? Are you feeling angry? Are you feeling calm, excited, or something else? Just go ahead and type your answer in the chat. And let's see. And Nithya, actually, I'm going to go ahead and I will look at the chat too. But if you could also monitor the chat, and if there's anything that I need to I see hurt and angry. Yeah, hopeful, excited but stressed. Happy it's Friday. I know it's Friday, y'all. Yes. Awesome. Curious. Great. This is fantastic. Well, I'll tell you what. I don't know about you, but I'm a little tired, to be honest. But I'm also a little angry. And I'll tell you why. So in February of 2020, I wrote a piece in the Hechinger Report. It's a nonprofit education news outlet about how 2020 was going to be the year that disability rights became a mainstream political issue. And back then, Secretary Buttigieg, well, he was then the candidate for president, released a plan called Dignity, Access, and Belonging, a new era of inclusion for people with disabilities. And it caught my attention, and it caught the attention of disability and inclusive education advocates. And among the proposals they were talking about ending sub-minimum wage for over 100,000 individuals. And typically those with significant disabilities who are working end up receiving a sub-minimum wage, and making inclusive education a national expectation. Now, don't you love that language? I love that language, national expectation, because this is the first time in history that a candidate for president, as far as I know, has ever put goals related to inclusive education in a campaign platform. So for example, one of the goals was to ensure that 85% of students with intellectual disabilities and multiple disabilities were in general education classrooms for 80% or more of their day by the end of the 2025 school year. I just love the specific nature of that goal, because currently we have 64% of students with any disability spend 80% or more of their day in general education. For students with autism, the numbers are 40%. And for students with intellectual disabilities, it's 17%. Those are not great numbers. But an important thing to realize about talking about percentages is that the percentage of time in general education class for students with disability is just one indicator of inclusive education. It happens to be the indicator that often gets the most attention because we're federally mandated to track that information. Here's the other thing. This might be like the major understatement of all time, but 2020 did not go like we had planned. There is a worldwide pandemic, there's civil unrest, protests, the schools closed, and much like many people who were already marginalized, students with disabilities suffered the consequences of an already unequal system. So yeah, I'm a little angry. I'm a little angry that we're not further along than we are with inclusive education in the United States, and that we're still segregating students with disabilities in separate classes or programs. And I know many of you are too. And so maybe you're new on this journey of advocating for authentic inclusive education, or maybe you've been advocating for years. Either way, I'm glad to be here with you. And what I want to talk to you about today is kind of what we do with that anger or other feelings. So in the chat, we saw hopeful, curious, excited. How do we keep going when we know that there is so much work for us to do? So today, here are our goals. How can we stay inspired to advocate for inclusive education? So that's the first thing we're going to talk about, is staying inspired. And then how can we stay on message when advocating for inclusive education? I'm fairly new to this communications role as a professional for the director of communications for MCIE. But as I will talk about later today, later in this presentation, I think the way that we talk about inclusive education, the way that we communicate about it, and our hopes and dreams, it's very important. And then finally, we're going to leave with a plan for next steps. Now, just a spoiler, this section that we're going to talk about, the plan, it's going to be short because, and it's going to be personalized for you. Like, I can't make that plan for you, but I'm going to lay out some questions for what you can do to kind of make that plan with all of the background information that I'm going to give you. So we're going to talk about how to stay inspired. Now, some of you may know that I wasn't always an inclusive education advocate. I started my teaching career with the belief that students with disabilities, especially students with significant disabilities, needed to be educated separately. And it was for their own, I thought it was for their own good and good of other students. So in the chat, I want you to tell me, and everyone else actually, so have you ever been a skeptic of inclusive education? I mean, I know you're here, and I know some are hopeful and excited and about discussing what this means. But like me, were you ever at a point of like, I just don't know? Have you ever been a skeptic of inclusive education? And I see it. Some people, we are your people. Thank you. Yes, no, not really. Okay, so we have some people that maybe have been, some people that maybe have been. Yes, the beginning of my career, I was also a self-contained teacher. Oh, I missed it. And like the comfort of being able to close my door. Thank you, Jennifer. Sandy, yes, when people said, because of behaviors you might be able to include. These are great. These are great. Yeah, Nicole, I agree. I'm not proud to say it, but it's part of my story. And I think that as I'm going to talk about later in the next section about how we message, it's part of my story, and I think it brings an authenticity to my story that I think is important. So. So let's talk about my first job. So when I started in special education, this is actually my school, Daniel Webster Elementary School. This is the school I taught at in Pasadena, California, 2003. I worked in what was called a special day class. And I had the San Gabriel Mountains outside my window. Pasadena is beautiful. If you don't know, where that is, it's where the Rose Parade is, the Rose Bowl. And I taught my heart out for my 4th, 5th, and 6th grade students with the labels of moderate to severe autism. And I'm putting those in quotes because that is what we called my class. Back then, my students would spend the entire day in the classroom following a strict routine that I created for them, moving from station to station, My pupils would learn a modified curriculum. And when they finished, they would earn a reward, playing with a toy, listening to music, eating a piece of candy. I mean, I think at this point, we didn't even have like, iPads or iPhones or anything. It was just like, what could we use to entice them to, get what we wanted them to do, right? I felt at the time like I was doing good work. We cared about the students. We learned about their unique interests and quirks. We would start each day reading the local newspaper, taking out each section and pointing to the headlines and having them read. And I would remember I had a student named Jasper, and not his real name, but that's what we're going to call him. And I'd say, "Who won the Laker game last night?" And Jasper would look at the headline and or the score and say, "Los Angeles Lakers 101, Chicago Bulls 94." And I would say, "Mr. A," who was my paraprofessional, I said, "That's right. Kobe's going to have a great year." And we would just, we would have fun and read the newspaper. And then after that, we'd go to circle time, right? This is 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, right? We'd go to circle time and we'd talk about the weather. We'd talk about the calendar and we'd sing Roy G. Biv, right? A song about the colors of the rainbow. I will spare you my singing voice right now. But, I would bring my guitar out. Then after circle time, they would check their schedule. And each of my students had an individualized schedule that displayed picture icons designating where they would go. So, after circle, my student Jasper would take the math icon and go to the math area. And then another student would take off the reading icon and go to the reading area. And I spent hours meticulously setting up these schedules so that it all ran like a script play. And when the structure worked, but when it didn't work, it was mostly because of communication issues, students wanting something and I didn't understand what they wanted, or maybe the thing that they wanted wasn't available at the time, and that caused a lot of frustration and meltdowns. And at the time I was going to school at Cal State University, Fullerton. And the reason in California, you could get hired as a special education teacher with a provisional teaching certificate. And at Cal State Fullerton, they promoted inclusion. They were teaching us models like co-teaching, where special and general education collaborate together, strategies for including students with autism in regular classes and other low incidence disabilities, intellectual disabilities in regular classrooms. And I remember having a heated discussion with one of my professors. And I said, my students need to be taught routine. My students need to learn in a separate environment. They can't learn with everyone else. And so instead of debating with me, my professor said, "Look, this is the assignment. You're going to pick a student who is educated in a self-contained or segregated class, like I taught, and you're going to create an inclusion plan. And don't pick an easy one. Pick a student that you never think would tolerate any time in a general education classroom." And so I had the perfect one. His name was Nathan, again, not his real name. He was in 5th grade, mostly non-speaking, engaged in self-injurious behavior. He engaged in verbal stimming. It was extremely disruptive, when he got going, and he would also get angry a lot, hit and kick anyone or anything next to him. And never in my wildest dreams would I have thought that he would be successful. But guess what, y'all? I was wrong. The plan for Nathan was to include this student, to make a plan for this student using his interests, communication skills, and adaptive strengths. The idea was to discover who Nathan really was, what he liked, what he was good at. And so the next step in that process was me planning with the general education teacher a lesson that would take into consideration Nathan's strengths. So despite all of Nathan's communication and sensory issues, he was a wizard with scissors. In fact, it was one of his favorite things to do. If he wasn't cutting strips of paper or cardboard, he was shedding paper with his hands, picking up leaves outside and crumpling them in front of his eyes so that he could see the pieces fall on the ground. It was one of his favorite things to do. So the plan began to form. Whatever we were going to do with Nathan in this 5th grade classroom, it was going to involve cutting. And after a few more planning sessions, the day finally came, and it was time for Nathan and me to walk down to that hallway to the science class. And the activity was to create a topography map out of cardboard. So luckily for Nathan, there was a whole bunch of cardboard to be cut for this activity. And he sat in his desk in the classroom with 35 of his peers, and he was calm and he was focused and he cut to his heart's content. Now, his task was meaningful, it was age appropriate, and for 45 minutes in that science class, he belonged. Now, did that one activity set Nathan on the path to full inclusion? No, no, it didn't. But what it did do was show me that any student could be successful when we planned using the strengths of that student. Nathan was my turning point, and I looked for ways to include all of my students in my school. And so the teachers and my paraprofessionals saw this success and bought into this vision. And so I don't know if you feel like this as an inclusive education advocate, if that's the way that how you feel, but at this moment, it was like a religious conversion for me. I had been baptized in the church of inclusion. And so that's often how I feel when I talk about this, is that I'm an evangelist of sorts for this philosophy, for this way of thinking, for how we should be remaking our educational system. But the experience that that happened with Nathan at this time, it just wasn't enough. My students were still segregated despite my efforts to increase their time and with their peers. And, having them included in recess and lunch and assemblies and the occasional general education class, well, it just didn't seem like it was enough. Remembering this story and telling this story is important as important for my journey as an inclusionist. So I want to ask you, and you don't have to put this in the chat, but just something to think about. What is your turning point? What is the thing that you got started that started you on this road? And maybe you haven't experienced it. Maybe you're curious. Maybe you're just kind of figuring, what this whole inclusive education thing is all about. And here's the takeaway for the inspiration part, and what I want to drive home is that if you have a story, great, you should tell it. You should tell it, and you should seek out other stories that will keep you going. There's this book called Fully Included: Stories to Inspire Inclusion by Michelle and Stacy Techner, and I do have it at the end of the presentation, a reference to that. It's got over 50 stories of families and individuals with disabilities advocating for inclusion. It's one of my sources of inspiration, and it might be one for you. I'm also inspired because I get to talk with fantastic people on the podcast, on Think Inclusive, talking with educators like Michael McSheehan, Jenna Rufo, and MCIE's own CEO, Carol Quirk. In fact, I have, I'll tell you a story a little bit about our conversation that kind of changed my mind about how I think we're going to change the educational system. But each time I've interviewed somebody, I've been podcasting since 2012, it reminds me that people are doing amazing work out there, and that keeps me going. I'm not sure if I didn't hear those stories that I would have just quit and been like, this is just too hard. Last story before we move on to the next section. So in 2011, I presented at the TASH conference in Atlanta. And in case you don't know, TASH is a disability rights organization that advocates for the human rights and inclusion for people with significant disabilities and support needs. And I was about 8 years in to being a special education teacher. And going to the TASH conference was kind of like a homecoming for me, because the same ideas and values that were present at this conference, it was like when I first sat in on my first lectures at Cal State University, Fullerton, about inclusive education. So I had the privilege of working with the Georgia Department of Education. They selected me to pilot a quote unquote inclusion program, where one of my students would be included in general education classes. I taught I'm originally from California, but when I moved to Georgia in 2008, I taught in a class that was labeled for students with severe and profound intellectual disabilities. And so it was very special to be able to speak at the conference in Atlanta and talk about inclusion, except that my understanding of inclusive education, especially in those years, was flawed. And I didn't realize it was flawed, but it was. So, and I want to show you, this is about I think a 5-minute video of the video that the Georgia Department of Education made.
Farmer Brown called home on Wednesday night to check it. Did you feed the animals like I wouldn't know? Yeah. Farmer pies, Bob, counting 7 and the pizza boxes.
I just want to make sure that you can hear that.
Yes, we are.
See the empty pizza boxes next to the trash cans?
The initial concerns that I had, including Damien, into the regular classroom, were how it was going to be perceived by the other students in the first grade room, and also how the teacher was having the right teacher that was on board with, making sure that the student was included in the activities and but not taken away from the instruction that was going on in the regular classroom.
I found that it was much easier than I had anticipated. I basically just did the same things that I always would do in my classroom. Taught the same lessons, and sometimes we would make adjustments for Damien.
Assistive technology was an important role in Damien's ability to access the general curriculum. We used several different devices, one of which was his Dynavox that would help him to communicate verbally words to his peers. And then we also used picture cards, word cards, so that he could make choices, between activities that he wanted to do. Also with the spelling, with the letters, he was able to use those for spelling.
Which word would you like to spell next?
Food or soon? Soon or food? That's the one you want. Soon.
Soon. Okay, soon. We'll spell soon.
The students were very accepting of Damien.
I think about him just being another kid.
The moment he stepped in that classroom, the children loved Damien. He is one of the most popular children at our school.
We wanted to send a letter home to let them know kind of what was going on, being very upfront with the parents, letting them know exactly what we were doing to make them feel a part of the project, so that when the kids came home and they were talking about what their day looked like, the parents were familiar with what was going on.
The children have not only learned to accept Damien, but that they have really embraced his uniqueness.
At first, the planning was just Vicki and I. Beyond that, we had our MAPS meeting, which was also a collaboration between the parents, the administration.
The MAPS process was great. It was when we met with the parents, just going over, there was a lot of history that I did not know.
First grade, the therapist, myself, everyone that was involved.
He really gave me a good background of who he was and what to expect.
I knew that Damien checked out a lot and had lots of therapies, but just knowing how involved the parents were and what their perception of the project was going to be and what they wanted to benefit from it.
I've just been watching Damien and his interaction since he's been in the classroom, since he's been a part of the regular first grade class, and I think he's been surprising us all. He has a newfound confidence in that, in his own thoughts and his own opinions and his own feelings. And we know the classroom helped bring that out, and he has no problem letting you know what he wants, what he doesn't want. But that engagement increased exponentially when Damien went to the first grade classroom. If he had not gone to the first grade classroom, I think he would have still been trying to figure out his voice. Damien has found his voice by being a part of this inclusion program. And we know that will go with him for the rest of his life. He'll never leave that. It won't stop. But having this in place has given our son his voice.
Oh, what did you do that, Sally? Oh.
Good job.
Damien?
Zoo. Can you say the word now, Damien? Zoo.
Zoo.
All right. Okay, well, I'll have you take those off.
Farmer Brown.
For a minute. Let me check the chat, make sure. Okay. So yeah, this was great. It was great for Damien. But I look back in this video with a different light. And I realized what we did, which was great, but it was for Damien, right? It benefited him, the students, the staff that knew him, but it did not do anything that changed the system that segregated him to my classroom in the first place. If it were up to my principal, teachers would have to opt in to an inclusive classroom and make sure everyone was happy, including the parents, before we did anything like this again. And believe me, I tried. I tried to use this as a way to change how we did things at my school, at my individual school, but it didn't work. And so it's no wonder that as my understanding of inclusive education changed, I realized I couldn't work there anymore. I needed to stay inspired. I needed to keep going. So let's talk about what kind of message that we need to explain what inclusive education really is. And I've often said that inclusive education has a public relations problem. So in this next section, I want us to talk about how we can stay on message to advocate for authentic inclusive education. So I write a semi bi-weekly newsletter called The Weekly-ish. I hope that you'll check it out. And in one of the recent editions, I gave readers a homework assignment, and it was to ask someone they knew to define what inclusive education meant to them. You see, I spend a lot of energy thinking about inclusive education, and a lot of this energy is coming up with ways to explain it in a clear and concise way so that everyone can understand it. But here's the challenge. You may already have thoughts about what it means when I say inclusive education. So as we're talking through these this next section, I want you to type a few words in the chat. What comes to your mind when I say inclusive education? I'm gonna take just a small coffee sip here. Oh, and I forgot to say that video was taken a while ago. That was a very young me. All right, let's see. Full access.
Belonging.
Okay. Belonging. Thank you. Belonging.
Natural proportions, access, membership and being valued. All means all. Friendships,
Awesome.
opportunity, respected. Access, meaning learning for all.
Great. So you probably already have thoughts, right? In 1997, Ellen Bratlinger from Indiana University used the word inclusionist. I'm not exactly sure if she was the first one or not, but inclusionists, using the term inclusionist has often been a negative term. And so I'm proposing a different spin on it. And I do call myself an inclusionist. And if you want to take on that term as, as a characteristic or a descriptor for yourself, I think that would be great. Because I think an inclusionist means a collaborator, a fierce collaborator for inclusive practices. And I want us as a community to be seen as not just someone or a community that wants to throw the system away, but we want to replace it with something better, because actually we know how to do it. We know how to replace it with something better. And so I want to briefly go over some, I know this is a lot of reading, and I am going to read this, so I apologize for all the words, but I really like, there's a couple different specific definitions that I really like. And so this one's from VN1000. Inclusive education is both a vision and a practice of welcoming, valuing, empowering, and supporting diverse academic, social, emotional, language, and communication learning for all students in shared environments and experience for the purpose of attaining the desired goals of education. Inclusion is a belief that everyone belongs, regardless of need or perceived ability, and that all are valued and contributing members of the school community. I love that it's a vision and a practice. Maybe that's why it's sometimes so hard to define, because we don't all have the same vision. But here's another definition. This is from Tash. All students are presumed competent, are welcomed as valued members of all general education classes and extracurricular activities in their local schools, fully participate and learn alongside their same age peers in general education instruction based on the general education curriculum, and experience reciprocal social relationships. Like I said, these are fantastic definitions, and anyone who's an inclusionist should be familiar with them. But these definitions to me aren't the complete picture. Very simply, students with disabilities actually have to be present in general education classrooms before we can call it inclusive education. And as educators or as family members, we have to recognize that the existence of segregated special education classrooms is a huge barrier to authentic inclusive education. This was a mistake that I made. This was a mistake that I, had when I was a special education teacher, is I could look at both of these definitions and see enough wiggle room to say that, oh, our school or our district was inclusive, but I was missing that first step. Sure, I included some of my students in 1 or 2 general education classrooms, and I felt pretty good about that. But what was my school doing to welcome all students in self-contained classrooms into general education to feel belonging? And what did that actually look like? Now, you are only one person, which means that in order for you to affect change, you need your friends, you need your allies, and you need co-conspirators to help. And so what I want to do now is, again, I'm going to throw a lot of text at you, but I want, hopefully, if you download, if you get the PowerPoint and you kind of digest some of these things that we're talking about indicators of inclusive education, that you'll start to think like, okay, where in my community, where in my school, where in my context are things that we can move toward when we think about indicators and how inclusive our school is, our community is. So here's some indicators from Villegas. And this is from a book called The Inclusive Education Checklist. So I'll go through these quickly. Students with disabilities attend their home school or school of choice that they would attend if they did not have a disability. The length of the school day for students with disabilities is not shorter than the length of the school day for students without disabilities. The first placement option discussed for each child with a disability is the general education classroom with all the necessary supports, specially designed instruction, supplementary aids and services, and related services. Students with disabilities are educated alongside their same age peers without disabilities. All students, regardless of ability, have access to the same curricular and extracurricular activities. And we use respectful language, whether that's person first or identity first, in describing students. School staff presumes competence for all students, meaning that we expect everyone to learn. We don't look at a student and we think, well, they're never going to get anything out of being in this science class. We're going to assume and presume that this student can learn even in with grade level content. And we want to do that, especially for those who are non-speaking. General education teachers are provided with and use specific information regarding students' strengths and needs in order to support each student to reach their potential. A lack of adequate personnel or resources is not used to argue that a student with a disability should be removed from general education. And the need for modifications to the curriculum is not used to argue that a student should be removed from general education. All student subgroups, whether we're talking about English learners, students with disabilities, they're making progress on grade level standards. And students are supported to learn skills leading to greater independence, self-determination, and self-advocacy. This slide is basically talking about the percentages, right, of all of the special education categories. So I'm not going to read that to you. And then the percentage of school students in the school eligible for special education survey mirrors and does not exceed the regional percentage. Again, these are from Villa and Thousand. It's a great book. You should check it out. But they aren't the only ones who have suggested indicators. And some of the ones that you had put into the chat, like scheduling students in natural proportions, meaning that no one classroom has an overrepresentation of students with disabilities. Special and general education teachers co-plan, co-teach, and co-assess with each other. This is from Costin and McLeod's latest book. Educators use community building in their classrooms to foster belonging. Again, we hear that word, belonging, that was in the chat. A universal design for learning framework is used to plan for all students. Differentiation is utilized for all students. And groupings within classes are heterogeneous, meaning that they're mixed. They represent the diverse abilities of all students. And then we have engaging instruction is happening for all students, and technology is used to support independence. I know that was a lot. And so I'm sure you're thinking, great, Tim, this is great. I love all these things, but what can I do about it? So I do want to talk about that. I believe that we need to think strategically about what we are messaging when we talk about inclusive education. And you know what? I am so encouraged by all the messages that I receive in my inbox and my email over social media that tell us at MCIE that to just keep going and to ask questions. And I think that as inclusionists, we should be in the business of changing people's minds. In fact, if somebody gave me, if somebody gave me $1 million, I think I would use that money to create a communications campaign for inclusive education rather than funding another model inclusive school. Because listen, there are model schools all over the country. Seriously, if anyone has $1 million, just let me know. Okay, we'll always take donations at mcie.org. Okay, all right, just put that out there. But just look at the work that has been done with Swift schools, and we're gonna be watching another video here in just a second. If you don't know, the Swift Education Center at Kansas University, if you haven't heard about the work that they've done, That kind of just proves my point as that there's a communication barrier on what inclusive education looks like and the people who really need to hear it. Or the work that MCIE has done across the state of Maryland and beyond. I burned myself out trying to make change in a system that is impossible to change from the inside out. You know, educators and just people in general sometimes don't like when I talk about this. And I'm really not trying to be a downer, but I do want to add a dose of reality to this conversation because this is something that I think is lacking in our communication about inclusive practices. So what I want to do is take another break of me talking and show you a video. And this, I think, is one of the best ones out there that shows you what an inclusive school looks like. Because again, we want to be able to visualize and explain when we're trying to advocate, what exactly do we mean? Because when we think about, again, that beginning question, like, what do you actually mean when I talk about inclusive ed? A lot of people, it's, well, everyone's in the same class all day, every day. And they assume that there's nothing different about the way that the educational system is. So we're going to watch this and then talk a little bit more about messaging, and then we're going to take questions. Okay, let me see if there's anything in the chat that I'm missing. All right.
This film features schools in Maryland, Mississippi, and Oregon implementing the School-Wide Integrated Framework for Transformation, SWIFT. SWIFT is a national K-8 technical assistance center that builds school capacity to provide academic and behavioral support to improve outcomes for all students through equity-based inclusion. This film features one of the SWIFT domains, Integrated Educational Framework.
Good morning. Morning, guys.
Good morning. Make sure you take your hoods off. Good morning. Make sure you take your hood off, baby.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you guys?
All right.
When It All Comes Together. A SWIFT film by Dan Habib.
So let's kick off this beautiful day with our Irvington cheers. So give us an
We had done all this focus on racial equity here at Irvington, yet we still had students marginalized because of perceived differences. And so I see that as a real societal gap and actually a human rights issue in our society. The fact that SWIFT embraced that put me on board immediately, honestly. SWIFT has allowed us to use our resources very creatively and pool all of our resources together to best serve the needs of all of our students, and not just students with IEP. SWIFT is about all students at the school, and just think outside of the box in order to make sure all students' needs are met.
Learning from their peers.
Most likely what you guys are going to be working with today is the 6 feet long pieces, but what I want you guys to notice though is on the inside there is a place for your marble to run.
But like, won't it fall out?
Velocity. You're gonna have to figure out where the best place for that loop is to make sure that your marble has enough speed to get through the whole loop. Which means, ladies and gentlemen, you guys have to talk to each other and problem solve and compromise. Get started on drawing your designs. One of the things that has come up this year in teaching students with a wide range of skills is making sure that my lesson plans are very thoughtful to all the students. It's collaborating with the special education team, with the other gen ed teachers to see what's going on in their classes and how we can do things cross-curricular, or how we can make sure that we're hitting all the marks for all of our students. I was working with our special education teacher to plan groups for the roller coaster project. What we were talking about and discussed making the groups accessible to all the students. So planning specifically for students with disabilities, with IEPs, with 504s. The idea for this particular activity was a lot for the kinesthetic learners and for the auditory learners because they have to talk and describe their ideas. And then there's also those students who work really well in groups and just learning from their peers with a wide range of skills.
We gotta figure out how to get the loop. How did we get it to work the first time? It was bigger!
So what I see for the general ed students is a lot of tolerance, acceptance. I see them being more thoughtful in their interactions. What I see for students with disabilities or IEPs or 504s are that they're beginning to realize that even in a generalized classroom, they can be successful in science or in math or in language arts or social studies.
Madeline, it's your turn.
I know the children need us. That's the most important thing. The children in the Mississippi Delta can learn just as well as any other children in the U.S., but their experiences and exposures are very limited. We're one of the highest when it comes to illnesses of diabetes and other health in the state. The median income status here for Sunflower County is around approximately $19,000 a year. And that's not a whole lot. Y'all have a good day. At James C. Rosser, we believe in a vision that all children will work together to build a community of dedicated and productive citizens. They know that we are here as a team, and they know that we have to take ownership of whatever our data says because it belongs to us. They know that all of our job is that we want to see all of our students grow. Good morning, Madeline. How are you? You been sick?
Ms. Wilkins will get that later. Okay, good.
I want her to be in that class with the regular kids, the kids that can talk, because she's learning the same thing that they are learning. And I don't want, even though she's kind of behind with her speech, I don't want her to be that much behind being in a different class. So I want her to stay with the kids in her age group because they also help her too. She sees stuff they do and she want to do it. She come home always pick up a book because she see the kids pick up a book and read, and she try to read to me.
The most important thing in inclusion is not money. It is the teacher's experience, the resources that we already have in the classroom, and making sure that we have differentiated instruction for students. Okay, so these are the words that we're learning this week. Now, who wants to spell this word? Madeline, it's your time. Madeline keeps me on my toes because Madeline is one of those students I know from the start that she gives me something different every day. Give Madeline a hand. Good job, Madeline. All eyes on me. And what I noticed is that she gets along well at every table. So she's able to work with every student. I even find that they even do scaffolding for her, even at their age. They know what to work with her on, and they encourage her to do well.
Well, my son Denver does not have a disability, but he does have a child in the classroom with a disability. Yes, it's very positive because he comes home and say, "Mom, what can I do to help Madeline?" Mom, what can I do to help her do this?
She's just a normal, perfect child to me. And I love the way she is accomplishing, because I thought that she wasn't going to be able to do it. I'm glad I didn't put her in a separate class, that she's in a normal class. I just hope her speech get better and she do as good as I did in school as far as graduating and going to college and everything.
Write your name, madam.
I'm going to let her choose what she want to do, but I'm going to push her as far as to go to college. Yes, I will.
Planning time is crucial.
And this is something that we may want to add in, like pre-filled in sentences.
This is my first year co-teaching. This is Molly Albany's first year in 8th grade. So we've been really able to grow together and plan together to build our classroom.
They need to be able to interpret from a graph, at least the solution point.
Planning time is crucial. To be able to sit down and really talk through what lessons need to be done, what concepts need to be addressed, and how we're going to address it. Which students need accommodations, which students need modifications. If you are teaching collaboratively and you barely know each other, then that comes across to students. And when you can plan together and build that relationship, you end up with a much more cohesive classroom where students know that you are a partnership. I just want to review. If you're given slope and y-intercept, if you're given standard form, if you're given a
Jen has more of the math background with things, and I have the special ed background, so she'll tell me, she'll run by me what she's thinking, and then knowing what the students' needs are, I then take it and figure out, okay, how do I have to go about adapting what we're going to do in class for the different students so that they're all learning the same material, but maybe in different ways. This is your X, this is your Y, this is your M. Jacob is a student with autism, and he also has some attention needs.
Jacob, we're gonna, okay, 10:05, but you need to use the clock. You don't need to use the computer. One of the reasons Jacob is finding so much success and having so much progress is because we were giving him more responsibility, and he's learning that he can handle that responsibility. I think in the past it was maybe taken for granted maybe that he would need someone on him all the time, constantly telling him what to do, and we're finding that he doesn't need that. I like to float around, and I like to work with as many students as possible because, first of all, I don't want Jacob to feel, or any student that I'm working with to feel that I'm just there for them and that they're kind of singled out. And I want every kid in that classroom also to be comfortable coming to me for anything. I absolutely think that if I was next to him all the time, it would be a barrier. It would kind of hinder his progress with social action with other students.
Okay, so put 1 underneath of it.
Segregating autistic students, that's the most dumbest and pathetic excuse that I can ever think of. Because they want to get along with the other classmates. It's just like segregation and apartheid. And if this was ever like an autistic school that would be segregated from just a normal school, I would probably feel very sad.
See you later. Bye, Mr. Deacons. Bye, Jacob.
My family has been in this community for over 100 years. My dad graduated from this very school building in 1946. My fear was that he was going to be someone that was going to have to be guided and directed his entire life, and that's not the case. I believe he's going to make a difference in this world. And my hopes and dreams are that he has a happy and productive life.
Every single person.
We have been learning about the controversy surrounding whether or not the United States should open its doors to the Syrian refugees. What are some of the reasons we already know about that are justifications for yes, accepting additional refugees, or no, refusing additional refugees?
There could be possible terrorists hiding in there.
Some people think they're innocent.
The states might not know what to do about with settling them.
It's because it's the right thing to do.
The students who are mainstreamed into my classroom this year are mainstreamed for the first time in their academic careers, some of them, and a couple of them have profound cognitive impairments.
Your job next is to actually learn what is the process. If you feel like reading today, go for the Time magazine article. If you'd rather listen today, go for the NPR article, all right? You get to choose.
I think it's really important for schools that are working on implementing the SWIFT model to think about what does every single person in the building have to contribute to make that model work. Fortunately, the paraprofessionals who I work with and Miss Lee are all highly flexible people and highly supportive people.
Even though I'm a speech pathologist, my philosophy is trying to sort of make it a blurrier line in terms of my role in the school, because I think I have strengths other than just being a speech language pathologist. So I think co-teaching allows me to use my professional strengths as well as my personal strengths to support all kids. When I used to pull kids out, I noticed that I was teaching something in isolation, and the kids that I was pulling out have a hard time generalizing skills anyway, and so when they'd go back to the classroom, they wouldn't use those skills. This way, I know more about what's going on in the classroom, and so I can help support my kids with what they're actually doing instead of working on something separate.
Let's get some hands of folks who haven't had a chance to speak yet today. Everybody's voice should be in this space at least once during the day.
I learned that half of the refugees that have come in are over 60 and the other half are children.
Who has at least 3 steps in the process?
There's really only so far that I can go on my own. That aspect of collaboration and getting insight and getting that reflection is just invaluable. For students who historically have not been in gen ed classrooms, there's no way I can do it without that collaboration.
Make people feel valued.
The district was a chronically failing school district. In addition to that, the United States Department of Justice was in the process of pending a lawsuit for allegations of the school district running a school-to-prison pipeline. The Meridian Public School District is currently 90% minority. Our African American males, statistically, a large portion of that population are at risk. And we want to garner any tools we can use to help us to save as many of our African American males as we can. The research shows that if we can get them to the 10th and 11th grade, that their chances of graduating jumps to 80–90%. I think at the district level, what we've done is worked on building capacity within our leaders and our teachers. So many times we ask our teachers to meet the needs of these students, but we don't give them the tools to do so.
Relationships play an important key factor in having a positive culture and climate. So in that case, I'm talking about relationships, of course, with colleagues to colleagues, teacher to students, teacher to parents, all stakeholders, because here at West Hill, all means all.
Okay, so today we're going to divide with decimals, okay? Remember in lesson 7.
I'm a worship leader. Sunday morning, most of the children and parents know me from the community, from singing at different things in the area. So it comes natural.
So let's do the movements. Ready? Everybody show me divide. Show me multiply. Show me subtract. Bring down. Then we do what? Check it out. And that's when we do the what? Inverse operation. All right, so y'all got that pretty good, okay?
I learned through music, movement, writing, drawing, whatever it is. That's how I learned. So I like to incorporate that into the classroom.
With each step, when you open it up,
that's fine.
You're going to find the next step, okay? So right where it says multiply, you're going to see the multiplication part of it, okay? That looks really good, right?
All the things that we implemented as far as SWIFT, everybody do what they can. I mean, it's not a me attitude, it's a we attitude. Let's get it done, and that's what we do.
The divisor.
So my door is always open to my parents because you must make people feel valued. And once you do that, you have them. You can build strong, long-lasting relationships, and that's what I'm all about.
What's next?
1.
Last one?
2.
Brilliant. Absolutely, 1 in each box.
Through the course of 5 years, hard work, we've been able to increase the morale with faculty and staff, with relationships, rapport, as well as with our parent involvement.
We've gone from having 70% of the schools failing to no failing schools. So for the first time in over a decade, we're proud to say that no child in the city of Meridian attends a failing school.
Lily belongs.
All right,
right, everyone has a worksheet. Number 1, we have all been convinced by others to buy or do things. Who on the list below usually is best at convincing you? Who is second?
Every student has the right to receive instruction with our age-appropriate peers in a general education setting, and it is our job to figure it out. It's not the student's job to figure it out. It's the adult's job to figure it out. And it's hard sometimes. It's all the adults are the ones that get in the way, right? It's not the kids. The kids don't ever get in the way. The kids live up to your expectations. So if you expect them to be peers with each other, they're peers with each other.
How do you think respect plays a role in someone being able to persuade you? Lily, what do you think? Do you think it's easy?
Easy.
So you think you could convince Jackson to give you his last piece of gum? No? But you guys are good friends, aren't you?
Yep.
Yep, that's what I thought. Okay.
You sit right here. Lily wants you to. Lily said she wants people that she wants.
I think Lily belongs in our classroom because she is wonderful and she likes to make friends and she is nice to everybody. She respects everybody around her. She respects the teachers, she respects her things, and it shows us. Like, she's like a role model for us.
You have a good day.
Meeting you are the Guardians.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think we would have had it any other way, right? I mean, it's just socially, she's just another kid in the crowd, which is a really big deal for us, right?
This is my 3rd year teaching, and I think before this year and working with Lily and some other students in my class with these severe disabilities, I probably would have said there is a separate place for some students to learn, but I really honestly feel that general education setting is the place for all students to learn. I feel like not only do they benefit from being together with their peers, but I think the peers really benefit from that as well.
Well, I met her first last year in math class. She was at a different table and I thought, oh, maybe I can meet a new friend because I'm not really that social, but she's just really funny and it's good to be friends with her.
It's hard to explain, but with that problem that we're doing on the board, when she does that and I can help her with that, it helps me understand more about what we're doing.
I try to modify things where it doesn't look any different for her. So I really like using the Chromebooks. If everyone else is, working on an assignment that is short answer or maybe even essay, I can create something for her on the Chromebook that's multiple choice or fill in the blank, or she could speak to the text and it could type it for her. But if you were to come in the classroom and look, it looks the same to everyone. I think it builds her self-confidence. She fits in with everyone, which is awesome.
Good morning. Welcome back, Jules. How you feeling?
I think we're all trying every day to do what's best for kids, and it really is. It's just a learning process.
Okay, do you want to come up?
I think just having them in the general education classroom isn't the answer. Learning next to each other isn't the same thing as learning with each other.
Okay, so
is it challenging? Sometimes it's really challenging. Sometimes we struggle with how to do it, and sometimes we don't get it right, and we have to seek additional support to make it right. My mantra every day is if it's good for kids. And if it's good for kids, I can stand by it and I can support it. And if it's not good for kids, then we have to come up with something else.
Everyone plays a part.
So I actually teach an elective that's drumming and songwriting. The model of the class is in a circle. So everyone, including the teachers, are kind of on the same level, and everyone plays a part in the music that we play. Chad is definitely the leader, but when we perform and play together, everyone plays a part, including the teachers.
I wanted people to understand that there was traditions in this community, African American traditions in this community, cultural traditions that should be honored and respected. And at the same time, we found that lots of kids who were in these special ed classes were also star drummers. So it was a big revelation of there's more talent that we haven't been reaching.
very kinesthetic, it's very hands-on. Kids are playing the rhythms, they're playing together, and it's just this inclusive, circular environment that really opens up every kid to be a part of it.
Everybody, bring your friends. Mupiamo que yo aba, guayo wacha palogo. Everybody, bring your friends. All your friends. Mupiamo que yo aba, guayo wacha palogo.
To learn more about the 5 SWIFT
All right. I know that was long, but I want to know, just type a few words in the chat. What are your initial impressions after watching the Swift Schools video? And here's where I'm going with this. This is about messaging. It's not only about convincing teachers that inclusive education is the right thing to do. It's not just about convincing families that it's the right thing to do. We've done plenty of that. When people's eyes are opened, they often feel helpless because they still have to work or participate in a system that isn't inclusive. So I want us to think that our target audience for our message is really district administrators or the people with the power to make change. There's tons of chat in here that I'm not going to be able to reach, but I hope that everyone can, I'm not able to read, but I hope everyone can read the chat, be inspired, and kind of, take that energy. So a few years ago, I had the privilege of touring Chime Charter School in Woodland Hills, California. And I talked to the principal there. It's a full inclusion K-8 school, no special classes. Everyone learns together. And he said that, they've been doing this for a long time, I think since the 90s, late 90s. And he said, look, I go to principals meetings and inevitably inclusive education would come up and the conversation would be around, wouldn't it be nice if we could change the system? And shouldn't we do this? Shouldn't we do that? And he would think, we are the people who run schools, principals. We are the ones that can make that change. When I told you I had talked to Carol, our CEO, Carol Quirk, a couple of years ago, this was before I worked for MCIE, in the podcast. And she explained that the districts that MCIE had been working with had kept an inclusion rate of 90% for 10 years. Right, so that's a long time. That's a history of meaningful inclusion, and I know that's just a percentage. But let's just think about that for a moment. That means that 90% of students with an individualized education program spend 80% or more of their day in general education. So naturally, I said, "Well, how do you make this happen? How do you create change that lasts?" And you know what she said? She said, it's the superintendent or assistant superintendent of instruction. They are absolutely key. If they don't have the vision and desire to make this kind of change, it will be a real struggle and may not be sustainable. There's one thing I wrote on Twitter a while ago. This was a couple of years ago, and I really like it. So I wanted to share it with you. Unless authentic inclusion is an expectation throughout an entire school system, it often stops after transitioning to a new school or a teacher. Inclusive best practices must be communicated from the top down. It is unsustainable and exhausting when it comes from the bottom up. And so here are a few things that I'm proposing that we can center around. And this is the kind of message that I want to relay to you. And hopefully, as you synthesize this message and think about it, maybe this is how you can begin to talk about inclusive education with the people that you want to influence. So number one, our current system is broken. We need a new system that includes and is equitable for all students. There's a lot of talk about equity. Equity, has been a popular word but we cannot have an equity discussion and leave out students with disabilities. It's all students, including those with disabilities. The next message is that inclusive education starts with placement. Now, like I said at the very beginning, it's just one indicator, but you can't be included unless you're there. Authentically inclusive schools don't have separate disability-specific classrooms for students with autism, intellectual disabilities, or emotional behavior disorders. They just don't. Now, we may be working towards that, but for us to defend those programs and say that we can have both, I don't think you can have both. And I think that's what we should say. I think that's what we should say. The last one is inclusive education is a flexible system. I hear all the time, there's no one size fits all solution. And I absolutely agree. But when we look at changing the system, that means we have tiered levels of support for all students. So if you hear terms like multi-tier systems of support, that's kind of what we're talking about. If students require intensive support, then they can receive that. And that can even happen sometimes separately, but it is individualized and there's always a plan to bring them back. It's never that we've created a program and said, oh, you have certain support needs. Well, that fits right into our specialized program that's separate and segregated. So I want to make sure that we have enough time for questions. So I'm just going to lay out a general plan for how you can stay focused on your goal of what you want to do next. So there's this goal setting strategy that is used for students who are transitions age called the self-determined learning model of instruction. And it's a whole thing. And I'm not here to talk about the SDLMI, but I do want you to look at this this graphic and kind of see how this could apply to your particular situation. Now, the SDLMI was created by the Kansas University Center on Developmental Disabilities. It's designed to enable general and special education teachers to teach problem-solving skills to students. So again, nothing to take away from this, and it's not an exact, this isn't exactly what it's meant to do, but I do like the way that it's planned out. So, and there's 3 phases in this process. There's a set a goal phase, there's a take action phase, and adjust goal or plan. And so those questions, what is my goal? What is my plan? And what have I learned? So when I first heard about this, I was like, wow, this really could apply to my life as an advocate, right? We need a goal, we need a plan, and we need to reflect on what we have learned. And so, for example, when we take a look at the indicators that we've gone over, right? All of the things that Villa 1000 has talked about, all the things that Costin and McLeod, all the things that we, saw in the Swift video, right? Is there something that you feel like you are knowledgeable about that you want to build on? Like maybe, you're really passionate about presuming competence, and you can build your knowledge on top of that. So when you message and when you talk to educators and administrators and other families, that is a topic that you are well versed in and you can kind of build on your strengths. Or is there a topic that you feel like you don't know enough about? For instance, maybe you feel strongly that general education should be the first consideration for a student with a significant disability, and you want to learn about how to talk about this in an IEP meeting, for your child or for your student. So perhaps your goal could be to speak up at an IEP meeting and advocate for the least restrictive environment using the language in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and case law. So you need a plan, right? So how are you going to get there? You're going to need to increase your knowledge about the least restrictive environment. What resources, what do you need to achieve that goal? What are some great resources for you to learn more? Well, I happen to know about a great resource that MCIE put out this year called the Placement of Learners with Disabilities in the Least Restrictive Environment. It's a 22-page white paper. Again, I'm going to put that as a reference at the end. and let you know how you can get that from us. But let's say you read that and you also, you read about the case law, you read about the definitions in the law, and maybe you find some great videos that help you understand LRE. Maybe watching that SWIFT video again, you kind of understand, how to use that language. And now it's IEP time, and the school district says that there's a regional intellectual disabilities classroom that has services that your child or student needs. And you bring up that in Ronker versus Walter, which is case law, that services should be portable and separate from a setting. And you ask, could those services that the student needs be provided in a non-segregated setting? Or perhaps you have the school team is arguing that the segregated self-contained special education classroom would be the setting where your student, your child would receive the most academic benefit. And if they were to be included in general ed, well, the gap would be too large and it would just continue to grow and they'd fall further behind. But because you brushed up on how to talk about LRE, you say that educational benefit is not the only consideration with least restrictive environment. And you bring up in case law, the Sacramento versus Rachel H., that the court found that the educational benefits of the regular classroom outweighed removal, meaning that Rachel was a full member in that class, participated with activities and peers. And then the court even said that a special class placement may be superior academically, but that doesn't require for a student to be placed in the best academic setting, only the appropriate one. So again, you found a goal, you found resources, and you were able to achieve that goal by advocating in that IEP meeting. And let's say that even after all those discussions, your student wasn't fully included. So you met your goal by increasing your knowledge of the LRE, and you advocated during the IEP. So, check those boxes. But now it's time to reflect. That was a disappointing outcome in the IEP. We didn't actually, we weren't able to include our student, our child in general education for as much as we'd like. So now we have to rethink our goal. We have to rethink and look that there's a new goal emerging. And your goal is now for them to be included 80% or more of their day. So using this structure, right, of this, having a goal, making a plan, and reflecting on the goal, you can use that and develop more goals as you move towards inclusive education. Now, this is great, Tim, right? But what about creating change where we are here in Pennsylvania, or in Georgia, or in Maryland, or in Oregon, or wherever you're listening or watching this from? Well, I'm not an expert in the politics of all the, everywhere that you live, but if you ask me, I think that we need to think strategically with our goals about what we're trying to change. So maybe there's a school district that already has this inclusive DNA that's kind of percolating. Could your goals be to introduce your school district with one of the school leaders, or point them to a district that's already making that change and moving inclusive education forward? Or maybe one of your goals could be to increase the knowledge of the system administrators about what inclusive education means. Maybe that means asking to meet with a district representative, or organizing an email writing campaign from your families to your district. My point is that the organization is really what is key about making change. So the last thing I want to do before we jump into the Q&A, and I think this is really important. So if you have an idea of something that you could do as a next step to make inclusive practices in your district move forward where you live and work, just put your thoughts in the chat, because people need to hear that, well, I have an idea. I'm going to share it with like-minded people, and that in and of itself will move inclusive education forward as a strategy. So go ahead and type those thoughts in the chat. As we finish up here, we're going to have about 30 more minutes of question and answer. I hope that that was helpful, and I'm going to look in the chat here. And then the next thing I want us to do is It's over here. So this is a way for you to stay in touch with MCIE. So you can go ahead and use this as a QR code on your phone and sign up to be on our mailing list. We send out resources, a monthly newsletter, and we're about to put together send out something called the Inclusion Catalyst, which will be a quarterly themed publication. So we want to make sure that you are still connected with us. So go ahead and use a QR code, sign up for our mailing list. And if you have any questions, let me know. And I'm also going to drop the links in the chat just in case you're not able to do the QR code. Y'all, this has been fun. I hope you didn't get tired of hearing my voice.
Tim, you want me to read a couple of these in the chat?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Educate my local team on the SAS toolkit. Heidi says, Diane Perry in Pennsylvania started a campaign, meet with Secretary Ortega, Carol Clancy, and others to start at the top. Linda, I need to find like-minded people who are in the district. I want to share the video and ask for feedback. I'll weed out like-minded folks. Recruit your parents of kids to insist on staff training by addressing administration. Staff needs support to make this work. Parents can help get the ear of admin sometimes.
Awesome. Very good. Any other ideas on how you can move this forward?
Make multiple intelligence theory more accessible to educators and training. Yes to advocating at the state level. States incentivize segregated practices and make it harder for individual districts to sustainably support inclusion, even if they are inclined. All great responses.
Great. Yeah, great point, Betsy. Thank you. I see Maggie says also for folks in Pennsylvania, if you haven't already joined the Pennsylvania Inclusion Collective, there's a Facebook page. So again, yeah, going back to our three things: to stay inspired, to stay on message, and to stay focused on the goal. Staying inspired does mean meeting and talking with like-minded people, because when we are out of community and when we are out of talking with like-minded people, it becomes we become to have that kind of hopeless feeling. All right. Oh, I like this early intervention.
I have a couple more. Yeah, Leah, start with early intervention administrators who separate kids immediately at 3 years old. Nicole, keep thinking of interest convergence. Civil rights concept that says civil right victories for people of color will advance only when white people see it benefits them. We need to show families of kids with and without disabilities that inclusive ed benefits all learners. Need to convert them to inclusionists.
I like it, Nicole. I like that. I like your use of inclusionists. Excellent. All right. Well,
are we ready to go to the Q&A session?
I think so. I think
okay.
so.
Is it okay if I stop your video?
Yes, we can. I'll stop sharing.
All right, so I'm going to turn the recording off and feel free.